Hello and welcome to this episode of the AML Clinic Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Clement. I'm a former SRA AML regulatory manager who now works with law firms to build defensible frameworks grounded in how the SRA assesses risk and decision making in practice. For many MLROs, the role comes with a unique responsibility. When concerns arise, when difficult decisions need to be made, and when the SRA come asking questions in hindsight, it's often the MLRO who finds themselves at the centre of those discussions. Today's episode is a conversation about what it really means to sit in the MLRO chair, and I'm joined by Tamara Quaylet-Tulloch, who is the CULP MLCO and MLRO at Punter Southall Law, and lives with these responsibilities every day. Tamara is a solicitor qualified in England and Wales and has advised both UK and US law firms on risk and compliance matters for over a decade. She has spoken at risk and compliance conferences, appeared on industry podcasts, and contributed to publications within the corporate finance sector. She's also a professional member of the International Compliance Association. Together, we'll explore the challenges, pressures, and judgment calls that come with the MLRO role. We'll also discuss one of the most significant money laundering cases to come before the UK courts, widely referred to as the Chinese crypto queen. Tamara, you're welcome to the AML Clinic Podcast.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
As am I. So let's start at the beginning. How do you define the MLRO's role in your own words, not necessarily the textbook version?
Okay, so I would say effectively overall responsibility for ensuring the firm understands the money laundering regulations and any AML activities, understand if there's any suspicions around money laundering and terrorist financing. And then, of course, once you investigate and you discover a suspicion, then it's down to you to then report those suspicions to the NCA.
And when you first stepped into the role, what surprised you the most?
It was basically a role that I've just realised you definitely couldn't be taken lightly. There's so much things to consider at the start. You get told, okay, we want you or invite you to be the money laundering reporting officer, but then do I have sufficient authority to make decisions on my own? Do I have access to all client files, management information? So there's a lot to sort of consider when you first step in, but I would definitely say it's one of those things that maybe on paper it doesn't seem too bad, dare I say, but actually in practice, it's a massive responsibility.
And what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you first took on the role?
That I'm personally on the line. I would say it's me on the line for not fulfilling the duties as the MLRO. It's not the firm. I definitely say to any upcoming or MLRO that you make sure that you sort of try and get an indemnity from your firm, because if anything goes wrong, it's you're on the line. So if there's that ability to have that indemnity from the firm, it will definitely go a long way.
Okay, so let's build further in that. So for maybe anyone who's new to this space and listening, what are the core responsibilities? You've outlined some of them that an MLRO has in a firm.
Sure. So the main thing is reporting any suspicions of money laundering or terrorist financing to the NCA by way of suspicious activity report. Attending board meetings. So you want to make sure that you're able to directly report to the board on how the firm is fulfilling its obligations under the money laundering regulations, and obviously making sure that the firm's compliant in that area. And then also just ensuring that you appoint a deputy MLRO in the event, we all take holidays. There's chance that someone will be sick. You need to make sure that you've got someone to cover you whilst you're not there. Yeah.
Could you give us an insight into what the day-to-day actually looks like? What part of the job do people never see?
I hope many of the other MLROs feel the same, whoever are listening to this today. It's that constant fear that you're missing something. Obviously, we've got guidance, we've got the legislation, great, but it's just making sure that between any meetings, managing everything else that you've got on the day-to-day, you just feel like, one, there's not enough hours in the day, and just the fear that there's something that you've not quite captured. Obviously, it's all about that suspicion. So it's making sure that you actually you find that suspicion, and then you can then make your decision as to SAR or not to SAR, as I like to say.
Mm-hmm. And I know lots of MLROs who would agree with that. So just on the suspicion point, so one of the trickiest judgments MLROs have to make is defining what the threshold for suspicion is. How do you think about that?
So looking at case law is R. De Silva, which is more than fanciful. And then we had the decision in Shah and HSBC, which says something more than fanciful. So I think when you're looking at that, it's just something that's actually there, like something actually doesn't look right. And I think once you get to that mindset that, yeah, something just doesn't sound right, or you might actually have actual proof something isn't right, that's when I would say you hit the threshold, in my opinion.
Lots of people talk about having a gut feeling, which of course the regulations don't cater for, but it's at least a starting point to start looking into things.
100%. Yeah, you need that. Yeah, for sure.
And how do you balance your legal obligations as an MLRO with the commercial interests of the firm? Because sometimes they probably compete, right?
No, 100%. So I think you have to have the understanding, making sure I go to relevant courses that discuss the roles of MLROs, or I just try and get as much content as possible. So attend webinars, and then just making sure from a commercial law firm point, you need to then make sure that the information that you understand at a technical level is then digestible by all the other fee earners in the firm. So just making their lives easier. And I think that comes down to a lot of the streamlining of processes. So rather than making it hard for people, just make it easier. So like, for instance, for me, replicating the suspicious activity report online form at the NCA and making that our internal SAR report. So
Right.
if there is a suspicion, then you get the partner or fee earner, depending on your firm, to provide you with all that information at the outset, rather than going back to request specific information. Because if you're going back and forth with someone to try and obtain that information, then they're not going to engage with the process. Whereas if you're like, look, I just need to come to you once, give me all the information, I can then carry out my role by making sure that that report's in. I think you get much more buy-in rather than it just being a difficult exercise.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how having a good compliance process really helps you to make the right decisions, because you have the information you need, and also you can evidence it when the time is right in hindsight.
Great.
What's one thing you wish more people understood about the MLRO's responsibility and the consequences of not taking action?
Well, one, I would say I'm not a mind reader. So you ultimately need the fee earner to tell you why they think the matter is suspicious, or if you have evidence of that during your business acceptance process or your business onboarding process. I need that information in order for me to make a decision whether or not to submit the SAR. So it's just that, that reminder from people. I need that engagement with you. Otherwise, I can't then do my job properly. And yeah, I'll never know if the suspicion's there unless someone tells me, or we do a spot check on a matter, or someone else in the firm then lets me know that there could be a potential suspicious activity.
So, next question. Sometimes as an MLRO, you have to put your foot down. What's the hardest decision you've had to make as an MLRO?
Having, most of the times, it's where fee earners don't want you to submit a report, and unfortunately that's not their decision to make, it's mine. I'm the MLRO. So I think there's that potential breakdown of a relationship, because you have to say no. As I said previously, it's my neck on the line, not them. So I think that's always the hard decision when you get into that conflict point where fear doesn't agree with your analysis of the suspicion, and you take that decision to report and they don't want you to.
So there's only one of you as an MLRO and the deputy, but essentially lots of fee earners. How do you ensure visibility across the firm so that potential red flags actually do reach your desk?
Well, that's the key word, visibility. So making sure that I'm available. It's probably a bit controversial, but I try and go into the office 3 days a week. That's not for everyone, but I think sometimes when you're actually physically there and people see you in on a daily basis, they're a bit more like, oh, hi Tamara, can I just run this past you? It's good to have that rapport. I think it's so important that you have that communication, or you have that visibility so people can actually see who you are. I think as well, I'm really fortunate making sure you have a good team. So like our firm's risk and compliance officer, Patty, she deals with the business acceptance process, but we have such good rapport and it's part of her role. If she sees anything that doesn't look right, she flags that to me immediately.
Right. So having the right support is important, and from what you said, culture as well is very important, because you could have visibility, and if the culture's poor, nobody will come to you.
And that's the scary part as an MLRO. You don't want to be in a position where people don't want to come and discuss things with you, because that's when there'll be suspicion lurking in the background. You're not going to know that they're there.
Exactly. So let's drill down into systems or processes that can help MLROs monitor activity across different departments as well. Have you got any tips to share?
So I'd say in terms of systems and processes, I would say CMRAs are a very useful tool if they're completed properly. So at our firm, what we do, we ask for the fee earners themselves to actually complete the CMRAs. I think it's their client, it's not our client, it's client to the firm, but they're the ones who have the business relationship with the client. So we make sure that the CMRAs are completed properly. If we don't think that there's adequate information, we're happy to sort of challenge the fee earners, and especially where we are sort of fee sharing firm, I think it's very important because we don't necessarily see everyone day to day. I think CMRAs are really powerful if they're used in the right way.
Yeah. How do you encourage staff to escalate concerns, especially when they're not sure or they're worried about flagging the wrong things? I mean, we've mentioned about culture, but what else do you do practically?
So practically, and I know this wouldn't be available to everyone, given the size of our firm, I actually have monthly catch-ups with every fee earner. So during that meeting, that's sort of dealing with any outstanding risk and compliance related issues, but also horizon scanning and actually just having a conversation with people. Like the communication is such an important part, I feel. So just having that touch base, you don't have to necessarily have a half an hour conversation, but you'll be so surprised at having that touching or having that person who's visible and that you can talk to makes such a difference. I think that had I been someone who was just sort of behind the screen and not forward facing, I don't think I would necessarily discover or have the relationships with the fee earners that I do.
I think that's an excellent point on building the right relationships. I want to bring in a case that I think every MLRO in a regulated firm should know about. And that's the case that concerns Chumin Qian, known in the press as the Chinese crypto queen. So it became one of the largest cryptocurrency fraud and money laundering operations ever prosecuted in the UK. Just a bit of background. Prosecutors alleged, she was prosecuted, but they alleged that the proceeds of a large-scale investment fraud was committed in China, were then converted into Bitcoin and moved through a complex money laundering operation, which involved luxury goods, high value assets, and international transactions. At the center of the investigation was the seizure of more than 61,000 Bitcoins. The case reportedly involved 2 properties purchased in Dubai, were bought, rented out, and sold within a year, alarm bells. And what makes this particularly relevant for today's discussion is the role played by a law firm. So during attempts to purchase £1 million properties in London, Mishcon Daria raised questions about the source of wealth and source of funds, and those inquiries ultimately led to them identifying concerns, and the transaction didn't proceed, and they submitted suspicious activity reports. So for me, this is just one of the most powerful illustrations of how an AML framework, when it's designed properly and their controls work, actually works. Chumin Qian was sentenced in 2025, and the case continues to provide important lessons for MLROs and compliance professionals. Tamara, what lessons should MLROs take away from this case?
Well, firstly, well done, Mishcon, for making sure that they are that SAR.
Yes.
Actually, I was fortunate to be invited to the FRC Leaders Conference in April, and actually
Fantastic.
one of the detectives that was part of the case itself spoke, and it was really powerful. I think it was great, but I definitely, biggest thing is the importance on filing a SAR. Had Mishka not done that, this criminal could have still been amongst us.
Yes.
So it's so important. If something, I think we discussed that earlier, there's something that doesn't necessarily feel right, it's probably a good time for you to do a bit more background research, and maybe then in those circumstances then decide to submit a SAR. I think it's important to know and write down whether the matter itself fits the client's profile. So does the client actually have enough money to buy £24 million or however much it was in property? Like, does that fit the profile? So again, I think it all rolls into our favorite word. You need to literally know your client, like KYC, know your client, and not just view KYC or obtaining the documentation as just a tick box exercise. You really need to examine what is in front of you. And then I think as well, which may be a step too far, and obviously sometimes when you're busy, but I think just not only looking at what's immediate in front of you, but obviously looking at the future as well. So like that point where you made where, the properties in Dubai were rented out and sold within a year, and that was like the successful conversion of the criminal property. So, maybe if more inquiries had been made, I know not everyone can do this, but I think it is a good point. I think maybe that might have identified future criminality.
Yeah, absolutely. All noteworthy points. Thank you, Tamara. What would you say to a new MLRO who is hesitant to file a SAR in a high stakes situation? There's a big client, a fee earner, there's board pressure.
Sorry, pal, but no, you can't be hesitant. You don't be hesitant. I would rather be in the camp of submitting a SAR than not to submit a SAR. Like, you've got to remember, this is you're personally responsible. So regardless, you might, you get the pushback, you might get the funny, the relationship might be tarnished slightly, but it's you personally. You can't, if there is really that feel or unease that there is suspicion, you need to report it.
Absolutely. So let's look into how you train fear. How do you measure whether that training is actually working?
I don't know if people will agree with this, but I always judge it by people being inquisitive. I think if you're training, you do your training right, you'll have that once the training's done, you'll get an email to ask a bit more about it, or people are just a bit more inquisitive around their opening. I always worry and always get concerned by the fee earners who don't say anything. I think that's always the thing. Like, have they understood what you said? Do they really understand your controls? Your policies, your procedures? I always just make sure that, the quiet people in the room are always the ones I try and target, because I always worry that there's something that they may be uncomfortable bringing to the surface. And again, going to my point about the communication, making sure that you're known, making sure that you're there and present. That does go a long way, I believe, in the money laundering reporting officer role.
So I think I speak to MLROs, and I've heard that before. People do say, when people just drop in and say, oh, can I just ask you this question? Oh, what do you think about this? They prefer that to radio silence.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
So we touched on this earlier. Compliance teams can sometimes be seen as the gatekeepers, the people who say no. What would genuinely improve relationships between compliance function and the business, do you think?
I think making sure that risk and compliance is something that's considered definitely from a board level all the way down. I think making sure that everyone in the business is aware who the compliance team is. So that is someone from the MLRO, MLCO, right down to any analysts. I think it's just important for them to know who they are. Although it falls on the MLR to report suspicions, it's great that if anyone can forge a relationship with any of the other parts of the firm, that they then have that risk and compliance function to then discuss any concerns that they have.
Absolutely. And I suppose it's part of that visibility piece, as well as making people understand the why behind the compliance decisions. We're not being difficult for the sake of being difficult.
Yeah, no, exactly that.
So, Tamara, this role carries enormous pressure, and I'm sure that's something that you've heard from your colleagues in a similar role. How do you manage that personally?
I think sometimes, actually, I was at a conference yesterday and I explained to someone that I held all the roles that I did, and he was just like, "Do you sleep?" I do sleep. What I try and do is get into the office on the days I do just earlier, just so I can like read through things, read articles, and that I just don't get round in your normal day. It's such a demanding role, and I'm really fortunate that I have a great line manager, that we have a good relationship, that we can have, you know, that funny, not joking about work, of course, but, you know, just having that nice, familiar relationship. Then also just someone I can turn to if I ever needed to. And then also, again, really fortunate, our board. Obviously, I go to the board meetings. I have to deliver my report to the board, and you know they check on me and support me too. So I think it's good to have that good network that, you know, make you feel that you're doing okay.
Again, the importance of the right culture, right?
Right, 100%.
So, I mean, what keeps you motivated in such a demanding role, though?
I think it's just knowing that you're making a difference. Like just going back to the case. Imagine being Mishcon and knowing that you the biggest UK money laundering case that started at your firm. It's good to make a difference and being heard and understood in a profession that you love. But it's really frightening at the same time. So
yeah, absolutely. What resources or communities have helped you most in your journey, would you say?
I think it's all about the risk and compliance sector. There's so many people. I've made some real true friends in the sector. So knowing that I can speak to them about what's going on, I think I'm a very open person. So just gathering that knowledge and knowing that you're not the only person going through this, and I'm sure so many people have heard at so many different conferences, risk and compliance can be a very lonely place, but you've got LinkedIn, like people's posts, discuss things with people, LinkedIn that person that has a similar role to you. I think it's just all about using that. And then of course you've got Legal Futures, Legal Gazette. There's so many, you can subscribe to so many resources out there, and I appreciate time is limited, but you've got the sources out there, so you should definitely use them.
I'm sure that will be helpful to some guys with the same role as yourself. I always like to end the podcast with practical tips for listeners. What advice would you give to someone who's stepping into the MLRO and perhaps even the MLCO roles for the first time?
First of all, good luck. You know, even during times when you don't think you've got it, you have got this. You wouldn't have been selected for this role if the board or senior management didn't think you were capable of doing that. And also, we're all human, so just take it day by day.
That's amazing. Thank you, Tamara. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for sharing your experience so openly.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and I'll hopefully see you soon at some more risk and compliance conferences.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time. And thank you to you for listening. Today's conversation has explored the weight of the MLRO role, the responsibility, the judgment calls, and the reality that much of the pressure sits behind the scenes. But we've also heard the importance of culture, support, and having the confidence to act when something doesn't feel right. If you are an MLRO, I hope this conversation has reminded you that you're not alone in carrying that responsibility. This is the final episode of this season. I want to thank you for listening and for supporting the AML Clinic podcast. I'll be back after the summer holidays with more conversations on AML, regulation, and the practical realities of compliance. If you have a topic you would like me to cover in the future, I would love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening. Until next season, stay informed and stay compliant.